Hello and welcome to Arts Alive Books. My name is Jerry Smith, and over the coming weeks and months we're going to be bringing you exclusive interviews with a range of local authors who are going to be talking about their books as well as about works and authors that have inspired them. Joining me tonight is Joe Moran, who will be discussing his latest book, Armchair Nation. And we're also going to be speaking to best-selling children's illustrator and author Jonathan Langley. First tonight is Joe Moran. Professor Joe Moran works in the Department of English at Liverpool John Moores University. And recently his book Armchair Nation has gone from hardback to paperback. Joe, can you tell us a little bit about the book?
My background is I'm a historian of the everyday. I'm kind of interested in things that seem banal and routine, and that maybe don't seem to have a history because they're just things that we do every day. And it's just about tracing those histories. So the book it's not actually a history of television, it's a history of watching television. And watching television just seemed to be one of those routines that more or less everybody does, but that perhaps doesn't leave a lot of trace behind, so that the kind of challenge as a historian was to kind of write about that experience.
And how did you take up that challenge?
My previous book was about roads. It was a kind of cultural history of the motorway, so I wanted to do something that was a bit more kind of popular, a bit more sort of mainstream, that perhaps a bit less kind of nerdish or kind of anarchy. That what I wanted to do was I suppose the challenge was writing about something that doesn't really leave a lot of evidence behind. I mean, watching television is just such a kind of routine activity. It isn't actually, it's something that people do talk about a bit, but it's not something they tend to write about or concretize or kind of leave much kind of archaeological evidence behind. So it was just about trying to tell that story in what is inevitably a sort of fragmentary way.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us some of the key points from the history of Britain watching television?
Well, one of the things I wanted to do in the book is it actually goes all the way back to 1925, which is when John Logie Baird demonstrated the first very primitive television in Selfridges, because I wanted to show actually a lot of the supposedly key moments in television actually weren't that key. One of the things that a lot of people think is that television began with the coronation. That was the moment that really kind of started TV in this country, and it was important. But one of the reasons that people think that is because there's not really much evidence of TV before then. That was when they started tele-recording that, so that all the images that you see when you see kind of clips of old television on TV, there's nothing really before 1953. So it was really about kind of going back a bit and just showing that actually before then even television was quite a sort of rich thing, and people didn't necessarily think of it as we do. We think of it now as this very primitive thing. Actually, it was something that people kind of really sort of got into, and it was a kind of important thing even before the Queen was crowned.
Yeah. Any other favourite moments from the history of watching television?
I mean, there's lots. One of the good things I think about TV is the strange juxtaposition of the banal and the significant, that it just kind of puts things together in kind of strange ways. One of my favourite bits of the book is before Christmas in 1968, which was when the Apollo 8 went round the moon, and it was the first time that anyone had left gravity basically and could see the Earth. So you got this very kind of momentous moment, but interspersed with, Christmas night with the stars, or just the kind of usual sort of banal Christmas programs. I think that's what's kind of interesting about watching TV, is it kind of brings together the significant and the trivial.
Mm. I remember the night Dennis Taylor beat Steve Davis. That was an extraordinary night of television, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was. That sort of broke lots of records, because it was the record audience for BBC Two, and I think it was the record audience after midnight, and they had to cancel all the programmes, including a serialisation of Bleak House. They cancelled it that week and they just went straight through, and I think it ended about 12:30. Yeah, it was the thing about snooker's another example of something that you would think would not be very televisual. You know, it looks like it's very slow. It's potentially quite boring, but the point about it is that it's actually it's a perfectly televisual sport, because it's almost the snooker table is almost the exact dimensions of a television, and it's obviously perfect for colour TV as well. But in itself, you wouldn't think it would grip people in that way.
What do you think's happening to television at the moment? I mean, your book comes down to 2012. There's a lot of changes, isn't there, with kind of pay-per-view and other...
I mean, it ends in 2012 because that's when the analog signal was switched off and we went completely digital. And that seemed a good kind of moment to end it. I mean, actually, one of the themes of the book is really about continuity. Because I think there's quite a lot of kind of technological futurism about television. They sort of think that we're all going to be watching it on iPads, or we're not going to be watching it communally anymore, and we're just going to be sort of atomized consumers, picking the programs that we're interested in. But people have been saying that really since video came along about 30 years ago, and I still think there's a lot of continuity. A lot of the same programs are around. If you look at the schedules, like 60 years ago, it's kind of dancing programs, cookery programs, variety. Actually, very similar to the schedules now in some ways. And I still think that the point about television is that you watch it together and you watch it all at the same time. And I still think that aspect of it is still there, even with all the technological changes.
Interview programs, you forgot to mention.
Yes, they're still going on because they're cheap, obviously. Yeah.
It was interesting. The royal family then was an important moment. That incredibly successful television program as a kind of response to watching television itself. It seems to anticipate your book in some respects.
Yeah, that actually started in 1998, which was coincidentally when all the digital channels started, and when people were starting to, they were predicting that certainly by now, 2014, that the idea of television watching as a communal experience would be over. But I think that the interesting thing about the royal family is it's still a communal experience. They're not paying very much attention to the television, but they're still kind of around the television, and that's what brings them together as a family.
And finally, I mean, what would be your own prediction for the future of watching television?
Well, I just think that things will basically stay the same. I think the thing about there'll be lots of new technologies. There'll be lots of different ways of watching television, but that we will mould those technologies around our habits. I think there's an awful lot of habit and inertia in the way that we watch television. I think television watchers basically love habit. And I don't think that's going to change. I think they're going to use the technologies to enjoy television more or less in the same way that they've always done.
And is there anything that you're particularly enjoying on television at the moment?
I kind of watch sort of trivial TV. I kind of watch things that don't involve too much commitment. So I like things like, well, I quite like Pointless, because there's quite a lot in the book about the sort of comforting nature of programs that are on every day, things like Countdown, and I tend to like those programs that are sort of on at a set time, and there's a kind of routine to them. And also I just like the presenters, and I just like the kind of ambience of that program. I don't watch anything very profound.
So you think the television will be with us in one form or another for a while yet?
Yeah, I think it'll remain a communal experience. I think it'll be something that people do together and talk about together. Okay.
Well, thanks very much for coming in and talking about your book, Armchair Nation. We'll be talking to you a little bit more later on about one of your favourite books. But for the time being, thanks very much, Professor Joe Moran.
Thank you.
Joe Moran will be back later on in the show to talk about one of his favourite books, The Extraordinary Crow Country by Mark Cocker. Before that, we're going to meet Jonathan Langley, who came to Liverpool recently to talk about the exhibition of his work. Welcome back. Jonathan Langley's beautifully illustrated books of familiar fairy tales have sold millions of copies, garnering him multiple awards along the way. To coincide with the Unity Theatre's production of Rumpelstiltskin, Jonathan has returned to Liverpool to launch a selling exhibition of his original work from his own retelling of this popular story. We spoke with him recently at the Unity Theatre as he was preparing his display.
Why we're here is for Rumpelstiltskin, which is a play on at the Unity from the 4th of December to the 10th of January. And I was invited to put on a show of illustrations at the theatre, and accidentally I illustrated Rumpelstiltskin years ago, so that's a part of the show. Okay, why illustration? I went to college here in Liverpool in the 1970s on a graphics course, and in the second year I got into illustration. I liked the illustration Maurice Sendak, Arthur Rackham, the old guys, Heath Robinson, those sort of people. And also the 1970s were like a golden age of children's books as well. So I fancied myself as a children's book illustrator, and that was what I specialised in really from then on. Well, I think when you read the text, obviously, you get the story in your head of what it's all about. But it's not only a case of following the text. An illustrator expands on the text and takes it further. How do I visualise a character? A lot of sketching first, and I work things out, what looks good, what sort of features I've got in my head of what the character should look like, and the clothes they wear, the sort of height, everything about them, and I take it from there really. If the dead it's rather hard, but if it's a living author, I sometimes I talk to them, other times I don't. I just get the text and that's it. It helps if I write the story myself, because then I just have to talk to myself about it. So that's easier.
Earlier in the show, we spoke to Joe Moran about his new book, Armchair Nation. Joe joins us again to talk about one of his current favourite books, Crow Country by Mark Coker. Joe, can you tell us a little bit about this book?
The first thing to say is it's not actually about crows. It's about rooks, and I can't remember the distinction between them, but it's mentioned in the book. Cocker is a nature writer, and he's based in the Fens in Norfolk. And the inspiration for the book is he moved from the centre of Norwich to sort of out in the sticks, I think it's called the Yare Valley. And he finds this landscape very difficult to read because the Fens obviously are sort of fairly flat. And he realises he can't look at wildlife in quite the same way because he can't get close to it anymore. So he has to sacrifice detail for the sort of the length of observation, and he gets interested in rooks because they can be seen from a distance, and also what's interesting is how they behave collectively rather than what they're like individually.
Couldn't he have chosen a slightly more glamorous bird about which to write?
I mean, that's in a way, that's kind of what he's interested in. I guess that's partly what drew me to the book, because it's about the ordinary. He was a twitcher. Well, he is a twitcher. He wrote a very funny book, actually, called Birders, which is about the tribe of bird watchers and the camaraderie between them, but also the competitiveness as well. And the thing about twitchers is that they are interested in the rare and the exotic, and they're very competitive about seeing sort of rare birds, so they'll go all the way to the Scilly Isles or to the Shetland Isles to just because they've heard about a sighting of a rare bird. So it's almost a kind of contrarian thing that he said, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to focus on this bird that is not kind of conventionally beautiful. And that's also very common because rooks tend to live kind of where humans are. They are sort of famously, the rookeries are on roads, quite near roads. So he's interested in them precisely because they are overlooked and they're not seen as kind of a glamorous bird.
I've seen a few books quite like this on the bookshelves recently. How would you define the genre?
It's true that there have been kind of very similar sort of books, actually similar looking kind of books as well. They all have the same sort of design. One way of kind of talking about it is that it's sometimes called the new nature writing. So it's people like Cocker. Robert Macfarlane is probably the other sort of famous exponent of it. Kathleen Jamie, Roger Deakin, Richard Mabey. And they are interested in nature in a way that's not kind of conventionally romantic or picturesque. So they're kind of interested in often very parochial engagements with nature. Quite a lot of them are actually based in the Fens in East Anglia. Cocker is obviously, Mabey is, Roger Deakin was. And the thing about the Fens is they're not conventionally picturesque, they seem like a sort of flat landscape. So they're kind of interested in writing about things like otters, like crows, like sheep, or animals that we live with day to day and that we don't kind of rhapsodize about normally. They're interested in that sort of aspect of nature, but they're also interested in how the natural world relates to the human. That they're interested in, and that's really what Crow Country is about. As it starts being about rooks, but actually it's really about humans. It's about and actually the connections between them, because rooks are very sociable. They're very intelligent, which we're supposed to be as well. They have memories. The rookeries will last for centuries. They'll sort of be passed from generation to generation. So it starts off being about this unglamorous bird. And actually it ends up being about Cocker himself and about the relationship between the human and the natural. Well, actually humans are part of the natural world as well. And
I mean, your first book you spoke about earlier on was Armchair Nation. Are we any connections at all with Crow Country?
Well, you would think not, but actually that book came out in 2007, and it was just as I was starting to want to write in a way that was for a non-academic as well as an academic audience. And I like the interest. I like the lack of rhapsody. I like the sort of interest in the ordinary and the quotidian. But what I really admire about people like Cocker and Richard Mabey and Robert Macfarlane as well, who is an academic as well, he's a sort of Cambridge Don, is that they write in a very scholarly way, but they're also interested in engaging with a sort of broader readership, and they seem to manage to do that. They seem to manage to write what is actually very knowledgeable, that is full of learning and full of scholarship, but they're also interested in writing, and that is a very lyrical book. It's very, very interested in kind of style and rhetoric and language. So it's really, I like the fact that they combine those two things, and that's what I've tried to do myself, is to write things that are scholarly, but that are also kind of hopefully written with a certain amount of kind of style and a kind of interest in rhetoric.
Joe Moran, thanks very much. Well, thanks for joining us tonight, and we'll see you next time.